The warning lights flashed red across Station Kepler 7 as another transport ship prepared to leave. Captain Jake Morrison watched through the observation deck as the Valdorian vessel pulled away from the docking bay, leaving behind a group of tall, silver-haired beings who stood perfectly still on the platform below. "Rejected again," muttered Commander Vex-9, his 4 arms crossed over his broad Centaurian chest. The station commander's voice carried the tired tone of someone who had seen this scene play out too many times. "That makes the 15th species. This month?" Jake pressed his face closer to the reinforced glass. The beings below were unlike anything he had encountered in his 12 years of deep space transport. They stood about 7 feet tall, with lean but strong builds that suggested both grace and power. Their skin had a pale, almost luminous quality, and their hair ranged from pure silver to deep gray with metallic streaks that caught the harsh station lighting.
What are they exactly?
Jake asked, though he had heard rumors during his 3-day journey to the station. Cathara Vex-9 replied, his voice heavy with something that might have been pity. "Refugees from the Outer Rim. The Dominion Empire took their homeworld 6 months ago. These particular ones have been here for over 2 years." Jake counted roughly 30 individuals in the group below. Most appeared to be females, with a few males scattered among them. They wore simple gray clothing that looked like standard refugee issue, but they carried themselves with a dignity that impressed him. At the front of the group stood a female who seemed to be their leader. Even from this distance, Jake could see her scanning the area with alert, intelligent eyes. 2 years? Jake shook his head. Why won't anyone take them? Vex-9 let out a sound that passed for laughter among his species. "You really don't know? The Cathara females are cursed with a dual nature that makes them useless to civilized species. They are too wild for peaceful work and too gentle for military service. No one knows what to do with them." Jake watched as a group of hegemony officials approached the Cathara. The lead official, a tall reptilian creature with scaled skin, began speaking in the harsh trade language that echoed through the stations. Lower levels. Jake could not hear the words, but he could see the body language clearly enough. The Cathara leader stepped forward to respond. Her posture remained respectful, but Jake noticed something change in her stance. Her shoulders tensed slightly, and her hands moved to her sides in what looked like a defensive position. The other Cathara behind her shifted as well, creating a subtle, protective formation around the younger members of their group. "Watch this," Vex-9 said quietly. "The hegemony official is probably explaining why they cannot accept refugees who might become violent without warning." As if summoned by his words, the scene below took a dramatic turn. The hegemony official waved his hand dismissively and turned to walk away. The Cathara leader took a single step forward, and Jake saw her eyes flash with a golden light that was visible even from the observation deck. For a moment, the tension in the air was so thick that Jake found himself holding his breath. The Cathara leader looked like she was about to spring into action, her entire body coiled like a weapon ready to strike. The other adult Cathara had moved into what was clearly a combat formation, their faces showing the same dangerous golden glow in their eyes. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the moment passed. The leader raised one hand, and the other Cathara immediately relaxed. The golden light faded from their eyes, replaced by something that looked almost like sadness. They moved back into their waiting positions, and the leader returned to her place at the front of the group. The hegemony official had not even noticed the moment of tension. He continued walking away, leaving the Cathara to face another rejection. "See what I mean?" Vex-9 said. "One moment they look ready to tear someone apart, the next they back down because they don't want to frighten the younger ones. The wild. Nature makes other species nervous, but the gentle side makes them useless as soldiers or workers. They form emotional bonds that are too strong for practical purposes." Jake continued watching the group below. Several of the younger Cathara had moved closer to the adults, and he could see the careful way the older ones positioned themselves to provide comfort and protection. The leader reached out and placed a gentle hand on the shoulder of what appeared to be a teenage Cathara who looked upset by the latest rejection. "What happens to them if no one takes them?" Jake asked. Vex-9 was quiet for a long moment. Eventually, the station will be forced to relocate them to a containment facility. They cannot stay here forever, and if no species will accept them as refugees, they will be classified as displaced persons without status. It is not a good fate. Jake watched the leader again. She was speaking quietly to her group, and even from this distance, he could see that she was trying to maintain their spirits. There was something about the way she carried herself that reminded him of his own mother, who had raised 3 children alone after his father died in the mining accident on Kepler-2. Have any humans ever made an offer for them? Jake asked. Vex-9 turned all 4 of his eyes toward Jake with surprise. Humans. Your species barely has enough resources for your own expansion colonies. Why would you want to take on refugees that no one else can handle? Jake did not answer. Immediately, he was thinking about the human colonies he had visited, places where survival required both toughness and cooperation. He thought about the frontier worlds where people had to be strong enough to fight when necessary but wise enough to know when fighting would make things worse. The Cathera below looked like they understood both concepts perfectly. Maybe, said slowly, what others see as a problem, we might see as exactly what we need. Jake Morrison stood outside the refugee holding area for 10 minutes before he finally pressed the entry button. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a large room filled with simple bunks and basic furniture that Cathara had arranged. There were few belongings in neat piles, and the space was cleaner than most military barracks. Jake had seen the leader he had watched from the observation deck looked up as he entered. Close, her eyes were even more striking than he had imagined. They were currently a deep blue color that seemed to shift and change as she studied him. Her face was sharp and angular, but not harsh. Everything about her suggested intelligence and strength. I am Zara, she said in accented but clear standard. You are human. It was not a question. Jake nodded and stepped forward slowly. The other Cathera in the room had stopped what they were doing to watch him. He could feel their attention like a physical weight, but none of them seemed hostile. My name is Jake Morrison, captain of a transport ship. He paused, suddenly uncertain how to continue. I saw what happened on the docking platform earlier. Zara's eyes shifted to a darker blue. Another rejection. We're used to such things by now. Why do they all say no? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. A younger Cathera female moved to stand beside Zara. She was smaller and had the same silver hair, but her face was rounder, and her eyes held less of the controlled intensity that marked Zara as a leader. This is my sister Naya, Zara said. She can answer your question better than I can. Naya stepped forward and tilted her head slightly as she looked at Jake. You are curious about us, but not afraid. That is unusual. Jake felt something strange happen as she spoke. It was as if she was reading his emotions directly, seeing past his words to his actual thoughts and feelings. The sensation was not unpleasant, but it was definitely unusual. We are Cathera, Naya continued. Our females are born with 2 natures that most species find impossible to understand. We have the instincts of warriors, but we also have the hearts of those who bond deeply with others. I don't understand the problem, Jake said. Honestly, Zara let out a sound that might have been bitter laughter. The problem is that these 2 natures are seen as contradictory. Other species want soldiers who can fight without emotional attachment, or they want workers who will not become violent when threatened. We cannot be either of those things. An older Cathara approached from across the room. Her hair was completely white, and her eyes held the wisdom of someone who had lived through many difficult experiences. I am Vera, she said with a slight bow. Perhaps I can explain it in terms your species might understand. Imagine a creature that becomes a deadly fighter when its family is threatened, but will risk its own life to save a stranger's child. Most species see this as madness. Jake thought about that for a moment. In his experience, humans often displayed exactly that kind of behavior. The best soldiers he knew were the ones who fought hardest for the people they cared about, and the best colonists were those who would defend their communities while still showing kindness to those in need. It doesn't sound like madness to me, he said finally. The 3 Cathara exchanged glances, Their eyes all shifted to a lighter blue that Jake was beginning to think might indicate surprise or hope. The hegemony officials said we were too dangerous. For civilian populations, Zara said. The Valdorians said we were too emotional for military service. The Centaurians said our nature made us unpredictable and therefore worthless as workers. Jake looked around the room at the other Cathara. Near the far wall, several adult females were helping younger ones with what appeared to be educational materials. The scene reminded him of teachers working with students, patient and caring. But he also noticed how the adults positioned themselves to keep watch on all the room's entrances and how quickly they could move if necessary. "What happened to your homeworld?" he asked. Zara's eyes darkened to almost black. "The Dominion Empire decided our system had resources they wanted. They gave us 3 days to evacuate or be destroyed along with our cities." "Where did everyone go?" "The males and the very young were accepted by the Outer Rim Alliance as workers," Naya said quietly. "The adult females like us were considered too problematic. We have been traveling from station to station for 2 years, looking for someone who will accept us." Jake thought about the human colonies he knew. Places like Haven's Rest, where the colonists had to deal with hostile weather, dangerous wildlife, and the constant threat of pirate attacks. They needed people who could work hard and fight when necessary, but who also understood the importance of community and cooperation. "How many of you are there?" he asked. 32 in this group," Zara replied. "Why do you ask?" Jake took a deep breath. What he was thinking was probably crazy, but he had learned to trust his instincts over the years. Something about these people felt right to him, even if he could not explain exactly why. "I transport cargo and passengers to human colonies," he said. "There's a world called Haven's Rest that might be interested in what you have to offer." Silence that followed his words was so complete that Jake could hear the station's air recycling systems humming in the background. Every Cathara in the room was staring at him with eyes that had shifted to a bright silver color he had not seen before. "You would take us to human space?" Zara asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I would have to discuss it with my crew first," Jake said honestly. "And I would need to contact the colonial government on Haven's Rest. But if you're willing to try, I think we might be able to work something out." Zara closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they were the deep blue color Jake was beginning to associate with strong emotion. "Captain Morrison," she said formally, "the Cathara would be honored to discuss such an arrangement with you and your people." The New Hope hummed quietly through hyperspace as Jake Morrison made his morning rounds through the ship. 3 days had passed since they left Station Kepler 7 with their unusual passengers, and Jake was starting to understand why other species had been so quick to reject the Kythara. It was not because they were dangerous or difficult. It was because they were so completely different from what anyone expected. In the cargo bay that had been converted into temporary living space, Jake found Ben Torres, his chief engineer, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a young Cathara, female named Kira. Between them lay a collection of circuit boards and quantum processors that Ben had been struggling to repair for weeks. Captain Ben said, looking up with excitement in his eyes, "You need to see this." Kira was about 16 years old by human standards, with bright silver hair and eyes that currently glowed with a soft green light. She held one of the quantum processors in her hands, turning it slowly as she examined it. "The energy flow is blocked here," she said, pointing to a section that looked identical to every other part to Jake's eyes. "In here. The pathways are fighting each other instead of working together." She handed the device to Ben, who opened his toolkit and made the adjustments she had suggested. The processor immediately began working perfectly. "She can see the energy patterns," Ben explained to Jake. "Not just understand them from books or training. She actually sees them moving through the circuits. I have been working on quantum systems for 15 years, and I have never met anyone who can do what she does." Kira's eyes shifted to a pale blue as she looked at Jake. "Is this ability valuable to your people?" "Very valuable," Jake assured her. "Ben, how many of our systems has she helped you fix?" 7 major repairs in 3 days, Ben replied. "The hyperspace navigator, 2 environmental processors, the communication array. Things that should have taken me weeks to figure out." Jake left the cargo bay and continued his rounds. In the medical section, he found Amy Foster, the ship's Minette. Working with Naya, Amy was running diagnostic scans on one of the crew members who had been complaining of headaches. But the equipment was not showing anything wrong. "He has an infection starting in his inner ear," Naya said quietly, her eyes a deep purple color that Jake had learned meant she was concentrating hard. "It is very small still, but it will become serious if not treated soon." Amy ran a more detailed scan focusing on the area Naya had indicated. The results showed the beginning stages of exactly the kind of infection Naya had described. "How did you know?" Amy asked, as she prepared the proper medication. "I can feel his discomfort," Naya replied. "The pain in his head comes from pressure building where it should not be. Your machines look for what is already there, but I can sense what is about to happen." The crew member, a cargo handler named Pete Collins, looked confused. "I feel fine, except for the headaches. You will feel much better in a few hours," Amy told him as she administered the treatment. "And you will avoid a serious illness that could have kept you in bed for weeks." Jake continued through the ship, finding similar scenes everywhere he looked. The Cathara were not just adapting to life aboard the New Hope, they were improving it in ways no one had expected. In the navigation section, he found Vera working with Lisa Chen, his first officer. Vera was studying the star charts for their destination system, but she was not looking at them the way most people did. "The ship feels uncomfortable in this region," Vera said, her hand resting on the navigation console. "Something is making it work harder than it should." Lisa checked the readings. "We are passing through an area with higher than normal cosmic radiation. It does create some strain on the shields and engines, but nothing dangerous. Perhaps we could adjust our course." "Slightly," Vera suggested. "The ship would prefer to travel along this path instead." She traced a route on the chart that curved around the radiation field. Lisa ran the calculations. "That would actually save us 6 hours of travel time and reduce engine stress by 12%. "How did you know that?" Vera smiled gently. "Ship tells me what it needs. All machines have a kind of spirit, and this one is trying very hard to take care of everyone aboard. I simply listen to what it is saying." Jake found this conversation more disturbing than the others, not because it was strange, but because it made perfect sense. Experienced spacers often talked about ships having personalities, but they meant it as a figure of speech. Vera seemed to mean it literally. That evening, Jake sat in his quarters with Zara. Discussing the arrangements for their arrival at Haven's Rest, he had been sending regular communications to Governor Kate Morgan, preparing her for their unusual passengers. "Your crew is beginning to understand us," Zara observed. Her eyes were currently a warm gold color that Jake had learned indicated contentment. "They are starting to see that your people have abilities that could be very useful, Jake." "Agreed, but I have to ask you something. Are you aware of how your eyes change color?" Zara nodded. "It is how we communicate emotion to each other. We cannot control it, and we cannot hide our true feelings from other Cathara. This is part of what other species find disturbing about us. What color are your eyes when you are angry?" "Red," Zara replied immediately. "When we are ready to fight, they become golden like fire." Jake thought about the scene he had witnessed on the station platform. "When the hegemony official dismissed your people, your eyes turned gold. Then you stopped yourself from fighting. Why?" Zara was quiet for a long moment. "Because fighting would have solved nothing and endangered everyone. The young ones look to us for protection, but also for wisdom. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose not to use your strength. And that is exactly why other species don't understand you," Jake said. "They want soldiers who fight on command, or workers who never fight at all. They cannot imagine people who choose when and how to use their abilities. But humans can imagine this." Jake smiled. "Humans do this all the time. We just don't usually have eyes that change color to show it." 3 weeks later, as the New Hope approached Haven's Rest, Jake felt more confident about his decision than ever. The Cathara had proven themselves valuable in ways he had not even expected, and his crew had gone from suspicious to protective of their passengers. The real test would come when they reached the colony itself. Haven's Rest looked like a rough frontier world from the moment the New Hope broke through the atmosphere. The main settlement spread across a valley surrounded by red mountains, with buildings that were built for function rather than beauty. Solar collectors and wind generators dotted the landscape, and Jake could see the defensive walls that protected the colony from the planet's dangerous wildlife. Governor Morgan was waiting at the landing pad with a small group of colonists. When Jake's ship touched down, she was a woman in her 50s, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent years building a life in hostile territory. "Jake Morrison," she said, as he walked down the cargo ramp. "I hope you know what you're doing." "So do I," Jake replied honestly. "Kate, I want you to meet Zara. She leads the Cathara group." Zara stepped forward, her posture respectful but confident. Her eyes were currently a neutral blue color. She had dressed in simple clothes that would not seem threatening to the colonists. Behind her, the other Cathara waited quietly. "Governor Morgan," Zara said with a slight bow, "we are grateful for this opportunity to prove ourselves worthy of your trust." Kate studied Zara for a long moment. "You're taller than I expected, and those eyes of yours really do change color, don't they?" "Yes," Zara replied. "It is how we show our true feelings. We cannot lie about our emotions." "That might be useful in a place like this," Kate said. "We don't have time for people who can't be honest about their intentions." The first few days passed without major problems. The Cathara were given temporary housing in the settlement's guest quarters, and they worked hard to make themselves useful. Kira helped the colony's engineers improve their power systems, while Naya began assisting at the medical center, but Jake could see the tension building among some of the colonists. The problem was not with the Cathara's behavior, which had been perfect. The problem was fear of what they might do. Rick Davis, who owned one of the larger farms outside the settlement, was the most vocal opponent of the refugees. He had lost his brother in a pirate attack 2 years earlier, and he did not trust anyone who might be dangerous. "I don't care how helpful they are," Rick said during a town meeting on their 4th day. "Those eyes of theirs turn red when they're angry and gold when they're ready to fight." "What happens when one of them loses control around our children?" Several other colonists nodded in agreement. Jake looked around the room and saw that opinion was divided. About half the people seemed willing to give the Cathara a chance, while the other half clearly wanted them gone. "They have been here for 4 days, Jake pointed out. "Have any of them caused problems?" "Not yet," Rick replied. "How long?" "Before something sets them off. These are supposed to be warriors, right? Warriors fight, that's what they do." The situation came to a head on the 5th day. Jake was working in the communications center when he heard shouting from the direction of the settlement's main square. He ran outside to find a crowd gathering around what appeared to be some kind of confrontation in the center of the square. 3 young Cathara were facing off against a group of human children. The Cathara's eyes were bright gold, and they had moved into what was clearly a defensive formation. The human children looked scared and confused. Rick Davis was pushing through the crowd, his face red with anger. "I told you this would happen. Get away from those kids." Jake reached the scene just as Zara arrived from the other direction. She took one look at the situation and immediately moved between the Cathara and the human children. "Stand down," she said firmly to the young Cathara. Her own eyes were flashing between blue and gold as she tried to assess the situation. But they were threatening the small ones, one of the young Cathara said, his eyes still blazing with fighting. Light Jake looked around and spotted a group of younger Cathara standing behind some nearby buildings. They looked frightened, and one of them was crying. "What happened here?" Jake asked loudly. One of the human children, a boy about 10 years old, stepped forward. "We were just playing chase." Little alien kids joined in, but then Tommy started, making fun of their weird eyes. He said they looked like monsters. Another child, presumably Tommy, looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean to make them cry. I was just joking around." "And then these 3 showed up," the first boy continued, pointing at the young Cathara warriors. "They started acting all scary and got between us and the little ones." Jake began to understand what had happened. The young Cathara had heard their children being called monsters and had reacted to protect them. Their warrior instincts had kicked in, but they had not actually attacked anyone. "Did anyone get hurt?" Jake asked. "No," several voices replied. "Did anyone threaten to hurt anyone else?" "The alien kids looked like they were going to fight," Tommy said quietly. Jake turned to the young Cathara. "Were you planning to fight these children?" The gold light in their eyes began to fade. "No," their leader said. We were protecting the young ones from insult. We would not harm children. But you looked ready to fight, Rick Davis said, stepping closer. Your eyes were blazing like fire. Our eyes show our emotions, Zara explained calmly. They were angry because the children were being hurt by cruel words. But being angry does not mean we will act on that anger. Governor Morgan had arrived. During the conversation, so what you're telling me is that these three saw some of their people being insulted and moved to defend them, but they didn't actually hurt anyone? That is correct, Zara replied. Kate looked around at the assembled colonists. And this is what we're all upset about? People protecting their children from bullies? But they look dangerous, Rick insisted. Of course they look dangerous. Kate said sharply, they were angry. When I get angry, I look dangerous too. The question is what they do with that anger. Jake stepped forward. I think we need to establish some guidelines for everyone. The Cathara children need to understand that human children sometimes say things they don't mean. And the human children need to understand that calling people monsters is not acceptable. And the Cathara adults need to understand that we handle these situations with words, not fighting stances, Kate added. Zara nodded. We can learn your ways. But our nature is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We cannot change that. We don't want you to change that, Kate said. We just want you to do it in a way that works for everyone. The crowd began to disperse. But Jake could see that the incident had divided the colonists even more. Some now respected the Kithara's protective instincts, while others were more convinced than ever that they were too dangerous to keep around. The real test was still coming. The emergency sirens began wailing at 3 a.m, jerking Jake Morrison awake in his guest quarters. Outside his window, he could see the red warning lights flashing across the settlement as people ran through the streets toward emergency stations. He pulled on his clothes and rushed to the command center, where Governor Kate Morgan was standing over a bank of monitors showing weather data that looked worse than anything Jay had seen in his years of space travel. Massive storm system coming in from the north, Kate said, without looking up. Wind speeds over 200 kilometers per hour, with lightning that can punch through our shield generators. We have maybe 6 hours before it hits. Evacuation plan? Jake asked. There is no evacuation plan, Kate replied grimly. This is our home. We ride it out in the emergency shelters and hope the defensive systems hold. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as the colonists prepared for the storm. Children and elderly people were moved to the deepest shelters, while everyone else worked to secure equipment and reinforce the settlement's defenses. Jake found Zara and her people at the main shield generator, where Kira was working with Ben Torres to strengthen the power grid. The young Cathora's eyes were bright green as she traced energy patterns through the machinery. The storm will hit the northern generators first, Kira said, pointing to a map of the settlement. We can reroute power from the southern grid too. Compensate, but someone will need to manually adjust the relays during the storm. That's suicide, Ben said flatly. Those relays are outside the shelters. Anyone caught in the open when that storm hits won't survive. Kira's eyes shifted to gold. The settlement will not survive if the shields fail. Someone must do this. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring from a different section of the command center. Kate Morgan's voice came over the communication system, tight with stress. We have multiple contacts approaching from the east. Looks like a pirate fleet taking advantage of the storm. All defense teams to positions. Jake felt his stomach drop. Pirates often attack during natural disasters, knowing that settlements would be focused on survival rather than defense.
Ow.
It was the worst possible timing. How many ships? Zara asked. 7 vessels, came the reply from the communications officer. Armed transport class. They'll be in weapons range in 30 minutes. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as colonists tried to coordinate responses to both threats at once. Jake could see the impossible situation they faced. Needed people in the shelters to survive the storm, but they also needed defenders to fight off the pirates. We can handle the pirates, Zara said quietly to Kate. Let your people focus on the storm. Kate turned to stare at her. You're talking about 7 armed ships. This isn't a playground fight. Now, we are warriors, Zara replied simply. This is what we do. Within minutes, The Cathara had transformed from helpful refugees into something that made Jake understand why other species found them frightening. Their eyes blazed with golden fire as they moved through the settlement with deadly purpose. But they did it while carefully avoiding the human colonists. We're still preparing for the storm. Zara organized her people into 3 teams. One group, led by Vera, would coordinate with Kira to keep the power grid stable during both the storm and the battle. A second team would join the human defenders at the settlement's weapon emplacements. The third team, led by Zara herself, would take portable weapons to the outer perimeter. "You can't fight outside during the storm," Kate protested. "The winds alone will kill you." "I can sense the wind patterns," Zara explained. "And we work together in ways that your people cannot. Trust us." The storm hit just as the first pirate ships entered the atmosphere. Jake watched from the command center as hurricane force winds began battering the settlement. While energy bolts from the attacking ships lit up the sky, the northern shield generators failed within the first hour. Exactly as Kira had predicted. But instead of the power grid collapsing, the lights stayed on as she rerouted energy through pathways that the human engineers had not even known existed. At the weapon emplacements, the mixed teams of humans and Cathara fought with an efficiency that surprised everyone. The Cathara could sense when the pirates were about to fire and warned their human partners to take cover. In return, the humans provided technical knowledge about the weapon systems that allowed the Cathara to use them more effectively. But the real battle was happening on the outer perimeter, where Zara's team moved through the storm like ghosts. Jake could barely track them on the settlement's sensors as they struck at the pirates who had landed to attack on foot. Rick Davis was manning one of the defense stations, watched in amazement as a group of Cathara appeared out of the storm. To destroy a pirate squad that had been about to overrun his position? "They're fighting in weather that should kill them," he said over the communication channel. "How are they even moving out there?" The answer came from Naya, who was coordinating rescue efforts in the medical center. "We can feel each other's emotions and intentions. In battle, we become one mind with many bodies. The storm cannot separate us because we are connected in ways that do not depend on sight or sound." The battle lasted for hours. When it was over, all 7 pirate ships had been destroyed or driven off, and the settlement had survived the storm with minimal damage. The cost had been 3 injured colonists and 2 wounded Cathara. But no deaths. In the aftermath, as the winds died down and the emergency teams began assessing damage, Jake found Rick Davis standing in the main square. The farmer was staring at a group of Cathara who were helping repair damaged buildings. "I was wrong about them," Rick said quietly. "I thought they were dangerous because they looked like warriors. But I understand now. They're not dangerous to us. They're dangerous for us." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. Rick pointed to where Vera was working with a team of human engineers to repair the shield generators. "Look at how they work together. The aliens sense what needs to be done, and our people provide the technical skills to do it. They're not trying to replace us or control us. They're trying to protect us." Later that day, Governor Kate Morgan called a town meeting. The assembly hall was packed with colonists who had fought alongside the Cathara during the crisis. "I think we all learned something important today," Kate said. "The Cathara are not just refugees who need our help. They're people who can help us build something better than what we had before." The vote to accept the Cathara as permanent residents was unanimous. That evening, Jake found Zara standing on the settlement's observation deck, looking out at the stars. Her eyes were the warm gold color he had learned meant deep satisfaction. "So this is what it feels like to have a home again," she said softly. "How does it feel?" Jake asked. Zara smiled. "It's like we finally found people who understand that being strong and being gentle are not opposite things. They're 2 parts of the same strength." 1 year later, Jake Morrison stood in the same observation deck on Station Kepler 7, where he had first watched the Cathara being rejected. This time, the scene below was very different. A Centaurian transport captain was speaking with Commander Vex 9, gesturing frantically toward a group of tall, scaled beings who waited patiently near the docking bay. Jake could not hear the conversation, but he could see the frustration in the captain's body language. "The Drakmari refugees," Vex 9 explained when Jake approached. Another species that everyone considers impossible to place. They are too proud for labor work and too independent for military service. What's their story? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Their homeworld was destroyed in a civil war. The survivors are all from the warrior class, but they refuse to fight for causes they do not believe in. At the same time, they consider most civilian jobs beneath their dignity. Vex9 shook his head. The Centaurian captain there has been trying to find someone to take them for 8 months. Jake watched the group of Drakmari. They stood with military precision, but there was something in their posture that suggested loss and uncertainty. It reminded him of how the Kithara had looked before they found their place on Haven's Rest. Have any humans made an offer? Jake asked. Vex-9 turned to look at him with all 4 eyes. Actually, yes. 3 different human colonies have sent representatives asking about displaced persons who might be suitable for frontier settlement. Word has spread about what happened on Haven's Rest. Jake felt a surge of pride. The success of the Kithara integration had become legendary throughout human space. Haven's Rest was now one of the most prosperous colonies in the sector, and other settlements wanted to replicate that success. Governor Morgan asked me to stop by and see if there were any refugees who might be interested in human space, Jake said. The Drakmori might be perfect, Vex9 replied. They have military discipline and technical skills, but they need a cause they can respect. From what I hear, human frontier colonies provide exactly that kind of purpose. Jake made his way down to the refugee area, where he found a familiar sight. The Drakmari had organized their space with the same attention to order and dignity that he remembered from the Kithara. Their leader, a tall female with dark scales and intelligent eyes, stepped forward as he approached. I am Commander Vex, she said in perfect standard. You are Captain Morrison. Your reputation precedes you. My reputation? The man who saw value in the unwanted Kithara, Dex replied. We have heard the stories. Is it true that they found a home among your people? Jake smiled. More than that, they found a purpose. Would you be interested in hearing about opportunities in human space? The conversation that followed reminded Jake strongly of his first meeting with Zara. The Drakmari had abilities that other species could not use effectively, which might be exactly what human colonies needed. They were natural leaders and organizers, but they would only serve causes they considered worthy. We will not fight for conquest or profit, Dex said firmly, but we will give our lives to protect the innocent or build something meaningful. Human colonies are about building new homes for people who want a better life, Jake replied. They're about protecting families and communities from hostile environments and dangerous threats. Does that sound like something your people could respect? Dex's eyes brightened with interest that was easy to see, even across species differences. 3 days later, Jake's ship left Station Kepler 7 with 37 Drakmari refugees aboard. As they entered hyperspace, he found himself thinking about how much had changed since that first journey with the Kithara Havens. Rest was no longer just a struggling frontier colony. It had become a model for integration that other human settlements were eager to copy. The combination of human adaptability and Kithara abilities created something neither species could have achieved alone. Kira was now the colony's chief energy systems engineer, her quantum intuition helping to design power grids that were more efficient than anything in standard use. Naya ran a medical center that could predict and prevent health problems with unprecedented accuracy. Vera had become the settlement's technical coordinator, her ability to sense machine problems, saving countless hours of maintenance work. And Zara had become something that Jake still found difficult to define. She was officially the Kithara community leader, but in practice she had become Haven's Rest's coordinator for external relations. Her ability to read emotions and intentions made her invaluable in negotiations with other colonies and trading partners. But the most important change was not in what the Kithara could do. It was in how the galaxy was beginning to see them. The first delegation had arrived. 6 months after the storm and pirate attack, a group of hegemony officials wanted to study how the humans had successfully integrated a species that everyone else had considered impossible to manage. We do not understand how you control their violent tendencies, the lead official had said during his visit. "We don't control them," Governor Morgan had replied. "We give them something worth protecting." More delegations followed. Scientists, politicians, and military leaders all wanted to understand the secret of human integration success. What they found was not some advanced technique or special technology. It was simply the willingness to see potential instead of problems. The Valdorians, who had rejected the Cathara a year earlier, sent a formal request asking if any Cathara might be willing to help with their colony defense problems. The Centaurians wanted to know if humans could help them find uses for other problematic refugee groups. Even the hegemony had quietly approached human representatives. It's about forming partnerships for refugee placement. Jake's ship arrived at New Terra Colony with their Drakmari passengers 2 weeks later. The colonial administrator, a woman named Carol Hughes, was waiting with a group of her senior staff. "Captain Morrison," she said as he walked down the cargo ramp. "We've been following the Haven's rest reports with great interest. Are these our new security coordinators?" Commander Thek stepped forward, her posture respectful but confident. "We are the Drakmari. We seek a place where our abilities can serve a worthy cause. Building and protecting a home for 10,000 colonists on a world with hostile weather and dangerous wildlife," Carol replied. "Does that sound worthy to you?" Dex's expression showed the same kind of hope that Jake remembered seeing in Zara's eyes. "It sounds like exactly what we have been searching for." 6 months later, Jake received a message from Governor Morgan. New Terra Colony was requesting additional Drakmari refugees, and 3 other human colonies wanted to discuss taking refugee groups of their own. The message ended with a line that made Jake smile. "It seems that the galaxy's unwanted are exactly what we wanted all along." Jake was reading the message in his quarters aboard the New Hope when Zara found him. She had been traveling with him for the past month, helping to evaluate refugee groups and establish integration protocols for other human colonies. "Good news?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. Her eyes were the warm gold color that still made his heart skip a beat. "The best," Jake replied. "It looks like what we started on Haven's Rest is spreading throughout human space." Zara smiled. "And beyond human space, I hope. Other species are beginning to ask different questions about refugees. Instead of asking what is wrong with them, they are starting to ask what they might be able to contribute." Jake reached across the desk and took her hand. 2 years ago, she had been a desperate refugee that no one wanted. Now, she was his partner. In work and in life, helping to change how an entire galaxy thought about the people it had forgotten. "Ready for our next assignment?" he asked. Zara's eyes shifted to the bright silver color that meant excitement and anticipation. "Always, who are we helping this time?" Jake pulled up the file on his computer screen. "A group called the Etherians. Are apparently too quiet for most species to communicate with effectively, but too intelligent to use as simple laborers." Zara laughed, a sound that filled Jake with the same joy he had felt the first time he heard it. "Too quiet and too intelligent. I think I like them already."